guest tonight is Pat Cronin. He's from Bristol originally, which is, I think, an amazing part of Britain in terms of the underground there. And he came over here around 1973 to Doolin, and his parents are from Cork. And Pat is into all things underground, like, you know, and he's doing some very interesting research at the moment in souterrains, which you might talk a little bit about. And I think it's not just the underground in the Burren, which you probably know is of real significance kind of nationally and maybe even internationally, but Pat also is addicted to the underground on a global scale, like, you know, even as far as Panama. So I'll just hand you over to Pat now, and I hope you enjoy the evening, you know.
Right, good evening everyone.
I was wondering where the Pat was.
Yes, so my background is pretty much what Tony has said. I'm addicted to the underground, and following doing reading archaeology in Galway, I realised the wealth of knowledge that can be gained by studying the souterrains. So little by little I began surveying them and realised that very little has been done on them. Clinton wrote a book in 2001, Souterrains of Ireland, and put his own interpretation on various finds, but essentially they're considered to be contemporaneous with ring forts, and they're considered to be sometime between 400 and 1200 AD. So let's start before I ramble too much. Right, if you'd like to push the first button. Okay, so we'll return to this slide a bit later on, but essentially we're pointing at the fact that we're not in isolation. What you see there is Ireland, you see Great Britain, you see Armoria, which is the peninsula in Brittany, you see the Iberian Peninsula here, the Pillars of Hercules. And so essentially what we're looking at is the passage of information and knowledge through trade. Sometime about 300 BC, the Celts that are in Western Central Europe were very, very powerful traders and gradually developed a massive network. The arguments that McAllister says about Celtic invasions and so on, it wasn't so much a hostile invasion, it was an invasion through trade. So effectively you had a sequence of development of outposts and so on that gradually spread around the coast, and between trading stations you had the passage of knowledge and technology. So this is, I'm digressing a little bit, but just to give you an idea. So you've got copper here, you've got tin and copper in Cornwall, you have some copper in West Wales, you have copper and tin in Brittany, and similarly down the rest of the coast. So it was a valuable commodity at that time. So right, that kind of paints a broad picture for the basis of part of my research. Okay, next one please. So again, so here we are, this is where we live. And again, it's worth noting that the Bronze Age copper mines are down around here, Ross Island and Mount Gabriel. Okay, next one. So here we are with my neck. Right, okay, so you can probably see all that. That make all sense to you, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially you've got Carron, which is about 4 or 5 kilometres to the north, Limini, which is about 5 or 6 kilometres to the west-south-west, Mulletmore pretty much due east by about 5 kilometres, and Corofin, which is about 8 kilometres to the south. Okay, next one please. So we're gradually zooming into this area of the Burren. What's interesting is you have Carricomon in the top there, top right-hand side. But there's very little, or very few, actually recorded features, monuments, if you like, in the area. Now, whether or not that's directly related to the fact that Carricomon is a very high-status cashel remains to be seen. But what you can see, there is some sparse habitation where you've got these concentric yellow circles. There's one predominant ring fort in the area, which is Cashel Gar, which, when you look at it again, that's not in isolation. You know, you've got this ancient roadway passing down through this part of the Burren, and it's in almost line of sight. This natural pinnacle that no one's ever been there before. It's a beautiful natural limestone pinnacle. You can only access it from the eastern side where it's less steep, but it's in direct line of sight, so that could well have been an access. It could well have been a toll gathering site on behalf of Carricomon. So again, settlements regarding enclosures, these are the black ones, and again, they're fairly widely spread. What else have we got there? So we've got a couple of caves there on this particular point. So there's Glen Curran, which is in the top left there.
Is that the blue spot?
That's the blue, I beg your pardon, sorry, yeah. So the blue spot is the
You
caves.
can't really read any of the words on it. It's all slightly blurred, of course, being so enlarged. You know.
Okay. It might be the surface, but anyway.
It could be too.
So, so the blue is the caves. Okay. Now, right. Now, of interest, there was somebody said to me earlier on that they've had a look for Clooncoose Cave and they haven't been able to find it. If you're using the map reference, which is registered, it's wrong. It's wrong by 2 meters east and 70 meters north. It is an actual fact there. Okay. Its given is in that position. Okay. It must not be mixed up with the small cave actually in the base of the cliff. Okay, that's something entirely different. It's a tiny little place. So what we've got, to just recap then, so we've got a high status settlement, Cashel at the top there, a satellite ring fort, and we've got a number of enclosures, and we have a number of hut circles. This is all what's recorded. There's much that isn't recorded. Okay, so we can only deal with what we know. So, Clooncoose Cave. Okay, so this is the matter. This is the subject. Okay, next please. Okay, so we've zoomed in now. Now, those of you who kind of know the area, is everybody familiar with the footpath up to Carricomon? Yeah, everybody fairly sure? No? Do you know Carricomon? Then you're stuffed. I'll explain it a bit later on. There's a it's a bit too much to go into at this point.
I'm still actually trying to work out where is Clooncoose versus say Carron or the main road to Carron, because there's green roads on the map just before, and then there's pale brown ones. What's the difference between them?
Pale brown and
roads or tracks or whatever they are. I'm not quite sure. What are they?
If you get hold of a 1 to 50,000 Ordnance Survey map, generally on the right-hand side of those maps you'll have a legend, and that will explain to you what a yellow road is, what a brown road is, green, and so on. And it will give you everything. Everything that's actually recorded on the map is actually recorded in the explanation on the right-hand side. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want that now, do you?
Just to say where Carron is, I know the area very well, but when you zoom into spare now, I don't know where I am anymore.
Okay, can you whiz back?
Go back in the tour.
Keep
I'm
going.
back again actually.
Keep going.
Yes.
Right, stop.
Now see, now there's Carron now, okay.
Cave is marked to just lying so.
So that's actually, is it the Carron Road that is just slightly off indeed? Yeah, as you go up from Lebanon, is it? No, from as you go into Pulkine, just above Pulkine. Isn't it? Yeah. Yes, I was Googling it at home before I came home.
Okay. Are you happy with that now?
Yeah, it helps, yeah.
Yes? Okay, forward. We'll be here all night. Right. So, what we have here, it's very difficult to see on these aerial images, but effectively, what you see, that track there, is the track as you come up to the footpath by Tom Guthrie's by Tom Guthrie's house. This is the track to the right. Okay, so you travel along here, and Tom Guthrie is literally where you can just see that junction there of the two tracks. That's where I tend to park. Okay, so you can then walk down and across here. Now, this is typical hawthorn and blackthorn in that, and you can drop down to safely. You can step down to literally where the cave is, it says the cave. You can step down onto an old path, and that path will take you kind of northeast, and it will take you down next to a cliff face, a rock face, which ends up at about 5 meters high. That gradually, you can follow it around off to the northwest, to the northeast, and then to the east, but it gradually dissipates. So it's only this general area which has this cliff face. Clooncoose is at the bottom of the cliff face. It's tucked in there very, very discreetly. What's interesting is, you can see what I've got garden. That's a neat little paddock which is enclosed with 3 walls. The northern wall, northwestern wall, is in actual fact the cliff face. Also there you can see there's a water meadow. The spring that you see there was the stream that issues there once made Clooncoose Cave. That's what formed it. Okay, the water meadow is always wet, even in very, very dry conditions. There's always a good bit of moisture there, which makes you wonder: is that the reason for these 2 enclosures? Now there is a building here of some form. It's not circular; it's more sort of sub-rectangular. Can you see it there? But essentially, these enclosures are quite large. You know, you're looking at maybe anything like, say, 50, 70 meters wide and 70 odd meters long. So you kind of wonder. We're in a situation where we're south of Carricamon, which is the high status fort, but you wonder whether or not this was used for overnighting stock, because it's quite a way away, and you have water. Yeah, so it's relatively rare. There's streams just to the east of here, but in this particular area, water is relatively scarce. So we've come from broadly an area of about 1 kilometre diameter around Carricamon, coming down into this now. So next one, please.
So Pat, what are the 2 black dots in the middle of the enclosure?
These are the markers from the larger image. Can you build back an image, please? Oh. Yeah, so these are enclosures.
Ah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so those are the enclosures that are around. And considering the ground is reasonable, you know, you'd imagine to be a lot less, which takes you back to the fact that you think, well, who's controlling this? And the proximity of Carricamon, you think, well, it must be under their sway. Okay, next one. So, this is a slide. You're approximately halfway up a gentle slope here, which is this garden that we saw on the previous slide. And this is the very small cliff face. They're 5 meters or so, but it's quite significant. And the path that you would come to here comes down on the left-hand side. As you actually pass down the path, if you come down in the winter time, you will see that there's quite substantial stone wall on the right-hand side, which is just behind here. I don't know what it's for, to be honest with you, but it does enclose this garden. Okay, next one. So, here's the cave entrance. It's not the original cave entrance. Okay, it's not the original cave entrance at all. There is anecdotal evidence of caves being backfilled by stone in the 18th century to prevent wolves using them. Okay, to reduce harm to stock. But this arrangement of stones may be partially that, but I don't believe so. That's my own opinion. Okay, next one. So, get your eyes adjusted to that. So that's the Carmahel just inside, just pretty much level with the entrance. So what you're looking into there is a passage about a little over 1 metre high, not very much more. Okay, and it's about 4 feet, 1.2 metres wide. Okay, and there's a gentle slope from here down to approximately that area. Okay. Okay. Next, please. Okay, so that's this general. That's the general sort of. That's Clooncoose Cave in its context of being within the landscape. I'll take a couple of questions now, if you like. Any questions? Happy? Everybody happy? Yes.
Is there any tradition about the cave? Spoken
There is
word
one tradition. It was used during penal times to hide a, and I quote, chalice for use at mass. There was a McNamara gentleman who sold a number of items to the museum, one of which was a meher, which is a three-handled wooden mug. They have one similar to it in the museum, but presently it's away for conservation. But it was said that it was kept in there for safekeeping rather than carry it around. The other thing was a boy or a child was left on top of the cliff while mass was being said, because they had a fairly clear view of the road. So if the naughty people were turning up, you had a fairly good wind in it, you know. Right, so everybody happy so far? Yep, okay, next. Okay, so just inside the entrance, this is the primary feature, okay? I stumbled across this through no great skill. This was pure fluke. A very good friend of mine, we were studying souterrains, or the potential for souterrains in Carrigamon. He said, I know a little cave nearby, let's go and tick it off. I crawled in, and the first thing I saw was this. It was a lintel, it was a stone set in the floor. Then when your eyes get accustomed to the light, you see this, okay? So what are we looking at? So here's the cave walls, passing up through there, relatively flat cave roof, and the wall passes down here, okay? Yeah. So the wall, the natural wall comes down, it curves out here, and this is important to remember, it curves out here, and you can just see the margin of where the gravel floor just touches the stone. Can you see it from back there? Because I'm having trouble with myself. Okay, so you've got that there. On this side, it's not so clear. Okay, it's not clear at all. But what you do have is you have this large stone, which is out of place, these stones, which are out of place, and these. Okay, you have what appears to be a large lintel. Okay, and on top of it, you have a number of other stones. Once upon a time, that was all wall. That was complete wall. Okay. Next one, please.
How do you mean once it was wall?
It was a wall. It was somebody built a wall and completely filled the passage to block the passage off. Okay.
As in it was all closed off up immediately above the lintel?
Yeah, just built up.
All right.
And blocked the entire passage.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Next one, please. So, what is that then? So there's a number of things I'm working on at the moment, and some of them may sound really odd, but imagine you're a farmer and you've got a young family, but you've also got your mother and your father, and they're relatively aged and relatively immobile, and you get wind that the naughty people are coming over to steal your cattle and steal slaves. Currency then, slavery and cattle. Okay, so what are you going to do with them? You need to hide them because they can't fight. You might be able to fight, but they can't fight. And you might have some food, some surplus food, because food was always scarce. So what you're going to do, so you're going to try and hide it somewhere, aren't you? Okay, farmers know their land like the backs of their hands. So you're going to try and hide it anywhere you can. So this was taken without a flash, but you can see, you know, you're only 5 meters in, but you're beginning to lose the light. So if you were to come in there without a torch, you take up a significant amount of that passage, best part of 1/3. So you reduce the light that you can see in front of you. Okay? Bear that in mind for later. Okay? So, another important point is, it's difficult to see at this angle. This floor is relatively flat to about there. Then it begins to slope up very gently, okay? And then it becomes relatively steep at the last bit. Next one. Have I put anybody to sleep yet?
No.
Okay, so this is the very bottom. This is the very bottom of the feature, and because of the constricted nature, I've had to do this in 2 photographs. So the previous one you saw looking down into the passage where the wall once was. This is what we call now a drop hole creep. So what you can see now here is the edge of the flagstone. Okay, here's the natural cave wall. This stone is hiding, is obscuring a particular amount. The gap from here to that small flagstone is about 12 inches. Okay, and its width, its actual width, is about 20 inches. So it's about that. Okay. So what you have here, this floor was constructed to maintain the floor's integrity. This flagstone was put in so people could slide over it without damaging the floor. This one here was put in to supplement the gap here. This stone is in actual fact 2 stones. It's 1 metre deep, so there's 2 very, very large lintels there. They weigh about 500 kilos each, so half a ton apiece. All right. They were needed to be that big to actually do the span. They sit on the natural curvature of the wall here, and they're on dry coursing stone underneath here. So again, a little bit later on, you'll see a better diagram, an actual drawing of what's going on here. But what they did, they dragged these lintels in, and then they built the wall. They'd excavated a trench underneath. They'd fitted this in, okay, to supplement the base of that, to make it that much more constricted, okay, and then this was fitted. So you would have had a little hole, 12 inches by 20, okay, and a solid wall. Now, if you were to put goat dung on there, or rancid milk, or anything like that, you would turn that wall in from being like a mud-faced wall to covered in, say, mosses and ferns and so on. So if we go back now to that image, no, you're right. So if we go back to that image, we were looking out the entrance. Okay, so you're a naughty person. So you're running up through the enclosures. You're looking for slaves. You can hear some screaming, so you're running after them. Okay. They manage to keep out of sight of you, okay? So they run up through the garden, they disappear into the cave, okay? You come running up behind them, thinking, well, where have they gone? Ooh, there's a cave there. You come into the cave, so your body takes up 1/3 of the light coming behind you. You won't necessarily see that little hole. All you'll see is the back of a cave. Now, you're familiar with caves because it's limestone country, yeah? So it's potentially... the technology there, being able to camouflage something like that, is quite remarkable. But anyway,
and where's the person gone that's been pursued?
we're coming to that.
You haven't mentioned that.
Exercise
Just while I had you, the naughty people, is it Norsemen Vikings you're actually referring to?
No.
I nearly thought it was
It's
British.
the Irish.
Well, I thought it was actually
It's not the Irish. They're coveting
Feel
each
free
other's
to be
cattle.
specific now.
No, it's surprisingly the amount
The
of...
neighbours, you're saying, in the Clooncoose.
Yeah, the amount of inter-clan hostility is colossal. And again, a lot of it based on the fact that there was insufficient food. It's a massive problem, you know. Next one, please.
Thank you.
Again, that's just to give you an idea of the size of this lintel. I mean, it is remarkably large. So, it's only about so deep. It's only about 4 inches, but it was sufficient to stabilise this edge. So if you're running in, and you like the Viet Cong going down their little holes, you'd run in, you slide down through that, and you'd be gone in a second. You know. And again, we'll come to the other side a little bit later. Okay, next one. So you drop down that little hole now. Okay, and the naughty people are behind you. So you drop down that hole, you come underneath these 2 lintels and the wall, and you pop up this side. Now, there's a lot of tumble here now, and all this has been knocked off the wall. They were substantial. They didn't use very small stones except to make up, the little gaps in there. But they were all decent-sized stones. And these have been cast into the principal pit and partly down the passage. Okay. Again, remember this slide because we're going to be coming back to it. Okay. Next.
That's from the other side of the...
That's the other
the
side
hole,
of
is it?
the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
That's the one. Okay. Next one. Okay, so this one here, before we travel into the cave much further, this one gives you an idea of the way they've actually laid the stone. Okay, so as you can see, there's decent size, there's a good bit of work gone into it. And particularly, you can see, what you see down there is natural rock, which is where this has been laid on the ledge, the natural ledge, and this side is all dry, coarse stone. Okay, next. Okay, so we are now about 10 meters. We're now about 10 meters inside, okay? And so the ranging rod pretty well marks the point where to create the other side. So you drop down the hole where you've been running away, you drop down the hole, you come underneath the wall and you're coming back up again, okay? To create the wall, to create the buttress to support the inner wall, they've laid a lot of stone here, okay? To create something that can't be dug through. All right. There's some drawings later on that we'll come to. So what you have here, you have the beginning of a slope that takes you down into the cave, main cave passage. Again, these have been dropped over because they've been removed from up there. Okay. This place has been, people have been going in and out of this place for donkey's years, and stuff's got moved. Yeah. Okay. Next. Okay, so that's where the photograph you just saw, that was taken from this position, and you're looking up at these stones that have been disturbed and brought in to allow better access. This place there's a lot of thought gone into this place, because you've actually got little features like this. That little line there, and that one, and that one, and there's another one just down here. They're flagstones that have been fitted into the mud slope. Okay, so mud is slippery, you know, it's a damp area, and even today it's quite slippery. Migration of mud has actually covered them in part, but they are quite substantial pieces of stone, so obviously people were going in and out of there. Now, arguably, going back to what we were saying just now, you know, if you had a surplus of food, families would raid it. I mean, we're only 3 days away from starvation. In a situation like that, you're going to go and steal someone's food. Doesn't matter if they're your mate. You know, you want to eat. So there is the potential that this could have been used as well as an ongoing food storage facility. Okay, but you can see. So someone's taken the trouble to fit these steps for convenience. Okay. All right, next. So these steps now finish here, okay? And then you're coming onto a relatively flat floor. Here is an alcove. It's an alcove probably half the size of this room, okay? Now, from the end of the cave passage, which is about another 12 metres on, there's a tiny little hole. Many years ago, cavers dig chokes, mud chokes in caves to see if they can extend a cave length. So somebody's been doing it in the back there, and what they've managed to do, they've cleared an area where there's a tiny little hole with a little bit of a draft. Okay. Now that draft's obviously been there for an awful long time, which is what drew the cavers' interest there. But to be underground for any length of time, that draft would have cooled you. So what someone's done, they've actually constructed a wall along here, and some of the larger stones have actually fallen off now. But essentially they've tried to seal that area off. It's like a little sort of, you know, a lounge, if you like, a little living room, to make it as cosy as possible. And again, it's a lovely example of solution in a cave where the water has actually beautifully dissolved the cave in a nice domed roof. So you could probably get, quite happy, you could probably get 8 people in there. Snug, you know, but you'd be warm enough. Okay, next. So, again, so we're standing, we're looking into this alcove, you know, those couple of steps are behind us, and we're looking along the main passage there now. Now, what you can't see too clearly from this picture, but essentially there are a sequence of flagstones in the floor, stepping stones. Okay, the reason being that with the vagaries of the weather that we have, the local water table rises and falls. So when it does rise, and you do get a number of drips in that, and the stream that we saw in one of the earlier slides begins to flow that much faster, it tends to flood this area, particularly around that little alcove, to a depth of about 2 inches. Okay, which is important to, again, another important to remember. So obviously what someone's done, they've put flagstones through here, stepping stones, to keep them out of as much out of the wet as they possible. Now this then, you come along for a short distance, and this now begins to rise ever so slightly. So this is actually made up ground. If you look at the floor, you can see there's a selection of well-placed stones. Okay, what you see here, excuse me, what you can see here is a pool here. Okay, and this is a threshold now. Okay, which is we'll come to next. Yeah, next one, please. Okay, so what you've got your stepping stones here. It's beginning to rise up. Okay, it rises up about maybe about 18 inches or so. And you come to this particular area. Now there's a regular little drip coming in there, which keeps that full. Okay, this is the high point, which is worth remembering. This is the highest point along that section of the cave passage. Next one, please. So this is the pool I was talking about. I wore out my previous ranging rods, but anyway. So what you've actually got, there was once upon a time, there was a neat arrangement of stone flags around there to create a nice, neat little basin. That's drinkable, and it's very, very nice. So what we're looking at here now, someone's gone through the trouble to actually create a receptacle to collect water. So this kind of ties in now where with naughty people running around the countryside and you feel under threat, you're going to build this, and we build for our children. So what you're doing, you're trying to invest in the future. So you've gone to the trouble to construct a wall, construct a drop hole creep, so that can be defended from the inside, which is something we'll talk about a little later. But once you're inside, you need water and you need food. So this marks out as a refuge. This is one of the points that mark out as a refuge. Now, there are two opposing points of view with regards to the use of Warner. Richard Warner from Belfast states quite clearly that they're purely for refuge and nothing else at all. Okay. Whereas Barry Cunliffe from, I think, Cambridge in the UK, he's quite adamant with regards to they were solely to do with storage. So you've two very prominent people who have diametrically opposed attitudes. So all you can do is to go into these things, measure them, photograph them, and
there must be evidence pointing to both.
There
must be evidence pointing to both.
Oh yeah, there are. Yeah, that's the one of the confusing things. I mean, if you see any souterrains in this day and age now, you'll often see that it isn't the discrete, tiny little entrance that you'd imagine it to be. Like, for example, there's one in Tirganeen, down in Doolin. There's a beautiful one in Tirganeen, where it's a sub-square cashel. There's a drop hole creep, which was in the centre of where the hut circle was. Okay, so probably the chieftain lived there, had access directly into the souterrain. But at some stage, somebody's dug out the souterrain passage in the perimeter. Because
obviously someone's had a row and they've gone after the slaves. In that particular situation, where you come up to the entrance, it looks like a mine passage. You have two of the lintels have been placed by somebody left and right, and you can see the original lintel at the top. So you have this lovely kind of square entrance. That's not original. That's been dug into. Yeah. So, and it must have really upset the attackers because not only did they dig into the souterrain in Tirganeen, I digress a bit here, but not only did they dig them out, but by the looks of it, they got them to backfill the entire souterrain so that it could never be used again. And that implies that there was somebody coming in from the outside, picked them as a target, perhaps somebody coming down the drop hole creep entrance to try and catch the people got stabbed with, I don't know, with a pointy stick or something, and that upset them. So they thought, right, we'll have this out. So it demonstrates that that modern entrances aren't necessarily the original entrance. So you can only really go inside and see what actually is left there. So we're very lucky with regards to the wall and the drop hole creep here, and this basin. So these all point towards the idea that we might have to run in there for a few days or maybe a week or so and just hold out, okay? So, as I say, so this is the high point of the passage, okay? Should I say it's the highest point of the invert of the passage, so it's the lowest part. It's the lowest part of the passage, but it's the highest part along its length. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, next one.
I don't know. Not to worry.
Okay, so we're inside now, looking down to that high point, and the basin is just the other side here. Okay? And what we have here, again, is a built-up area. All right?
Is this further in again?
This is further in again, yeah. So this is built up. So what you have here is a reservoir now. Okay, so they've taken something that's either happened or it may have been from the original design, but they've constructed a fairly large reservoir here to supplement this basin here. Okay. So in this reservoir, I was saying to you about how rainwater ebbs and flows. We have sort of dry periods, we have wet periods. Well, obviously, at some stage or another, they've experienced a very dry, protracted period. So what they've done, they've excavated another basin, just as a sump, so as to collect the water. Yeah? Okay, next one. It'll give us a better... Okay. So, again, you can see we've got the floor of the reservoir here, and that's the size of this secondary basin. Okay, next one. Okay, so the pool, there's a survey coming up shortly, so the pool is maybe 4 meters, 5 meters in diameter, give or take. And up to that point in the floor I was saying to you about, which was like the invert level, okay, you could probably get in there when full, probably 2,000 gallons. So, it's quite an undertaking, unless it was very easy to dig and they thought to themselves, well, it's coming out easy enough, we'll collect what we can. But again, it does demonstrate and ask the question, well, why go to all this trouble? There's a number of issues surrounding it which kind of highlight that this was a refuge and this area was actually there's a centre of hostilities for a period of time. So what you have here, that's a survey point. But what you have here, you have the natural cave now disappearing away. This area of soil here was what was dug out by the cavers, which is where the little passage that they excavated out is just in there.
It's created the draft, was it?
Yeah, the draft is coming from a tiny little hole.
Originally there was a tiny hole, was it?
Originally there was
They
a tiny
felt this draft and thought, aha.
Oh yeah, that's what you're, isn't that right, Colin? We follow the draft.
Follow the draft.
And is that 2.5 metres, that ranging?
No, that's 1 metre. That is. That's a 1 metre roll.
Yeah,
So these are 4
high.
inches or 0.1 of a metre.
Oh,
Yeah.
I apologise. I should have explained that.
Yeah,
If it was 2 metres long, I'd
remember
carry
the
it.
size of
That's
your-
why I sort of like put 2 and then a half one together.
No. That's what
Yeah, when you're giving scale, you've got to know what the scale is.
Absolutely. Okay, next. So that's the end of the passage. So you can see where cavers have actually dug along there. Okay. So this is a coarse fill. It's a very coarse fill there. Okay, next.
Sorry. Do you just go back to that reservoir? Sorry, do you know the reservoir you just talked about?
Yeah.
Basin, yeah.
Go back like 2 or 3, yeah? And again, please. Yeah?
I'm just
One before?
thinking, with water being so scarce in the Burren during a very warm summer period, could they have actually used that as basically a reservoir for the summer and collected
Well, I
it?
suppose potentially, yeah. I suppose
However, they
potentially.
would have got it out, but maybe.
But don't forget, you've also got the spring. The
And
spring would have been
as
running.
you mentioned right at the beginning, there's a spring up on the ground.
Yeah.
So it
But
wouldn't
they do
need-
run dry.
Well, it depends unless that goes dry.
Yeah, but the water gets very low, like during
It does,
the
yeah,
summer.
yeah.
So they
Depending
had
on
a
the spot.
storage.
Storing.
Sorry, say again.
Well, I'm just wondering, was it storage as well, for the summer period?
Well, obviously, this has the capacity to store,
Yeah.
okay? But the spring just outside, just to the east of the main entrance, there's
That would
always
be
a
the
trickle
feed.
from there.
Yeah. Then
There's
it would,
always a
it would
trickle.
have been filled from that spring, wouldn't it?
There would be,
It would have been, this reservoir would have been filled from that spring and probably from any other feeds.
yeah, if you can imagine, somewhere, if you could go forward a couple, right, hold it there. So somewhere just inside there, which is like, we're now going into the side of the hill there, somewhere in there, as the water was bringing down, was creating the cave, okay, between winter and summer flows, okay, as it slowed down, it would have deposited silts. So at one point, there would be insufficient room for this water to pass over, so it would have favoured this side. So then it would only deposit stuff over there when there was a flood, and as it would gradually subside, so more silt would be deposited. So you would build up these layers, greatly simplified. But essentially, the stream is always present, but we can't quite see it in the cave. So as the water's running back and forth out of sight, it will actually filter through the debris and allow that reservoir to fill. But it is a substantial reservoir. I mean, as I say, it's about 2,000 gallons worth. So that's quite a lot. You know, it's quite a lot. But as I say, the spring outside is pretty much all year round, which is the only. It's one of the factors that I can think of, which lends itself to being so close to Carricamon. The two enclosures outside that are the size they are, and the fact there's no real hut circles in there. You know, so it kind of, there's substantial walls, but there's no real living quarters there other than this curious little building. Yeah? Does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, I'm just...
Yeah.
just
No, ask away. Ask away.
Maybe nobody lived there as such. Out on the outside.
Possibly, yeah. You know, we don't know. That's the
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
Best guess.
Yeah.
Okay, sir, next. Okay, so, right, back one please. So, that's... So what you have there, this is, if you like, we can summarise here now. So, there's the entrance, so you slide down inside the entrance, it kind of levels off. We have this wall feature, we have the drop hole creep, okay? We then have this rubble-strewn slope, flagstones. This is the alcove, and this is the wall in front of it. So you can see, you know, it's adequate, it's out of the draft, yeah? You then have straightforward passage come along here, it's stepping stones, it begins to rise, okay? There's your basin, and this is the size of the pool that I've measured, but in actual fact it actually passes back up here, so you have like a little watermark back here. So it is quite, I'm a plumber, once upon a time I was a plumber, so I can measure water capacity, so that's not a problem. And so you can see the cave gets smaller and smaller, and to the limit of where the caves have dug. So that gives you the general layout of and the positions of the features that we've looked at.
So in what direction does the water flow in the cave? Is it from back to front or front to back?
It comes from the back, okay, and it would have flown out through this way, which is a point which I'll be bringing up a little bit later on, because it helps explain this section of the feature, yeah? Okay, so from the entrance here, the spring is over here somewhere. So there's a passage up here in a junction. Once upon a time there was a junction up the back there. Okay, next. What's
So
next?
Pat, there's a lot of constructed stonework.
Oh yeah,
So is it all, has it come from outside? Has it been brought in, or is it?
yeah. You'll see a little bit more in a minute.
Yeah.
It helps.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about big bits of stone to carry
Oh
that
yeah, oh
into
yeah.
the cave passages.
And there's been a very clever way in which they've had to have done that. You know, a very, very well organised, very well thought out bit of technology. Everybody happy with that so far?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's a
is it
lot.
about 80 metres, do you think?
30. It's 30 metres long, so it's about 100 feet,
Okay.
give or take. Okay, next. Okay, so a defensive feature. The defensive feature is what we've been talking about. That's the big wall. That's the big lintels and the big wall and the drop hole creep. Okay. But it's not just that in this case that how it was built. Okay, next. Okay, so we're now standing with our backs to the wall. Okay, and I'm standing on the hole in the floor which we would duck down and disappear inside. Okay, so I'm looking back to the entrance. So, what do we see? We see a pile of stones. Well, when you look at the level of the cave passage inside and you extrapolate that level very conservatively, you realise that all this has been brought in. Okay? Once upon a time, the cave passage would have been the best part of 2 metres high. But to create that little drop hole creep where they drop down through the wall, through the floor, under the wall and back up again, they had to create an area like that. So I mean, I'm 1.6, so if the cave patches is that high, okay, you've had to bring in 5, let's be conservative, 5 cubic metres of stone. So 5 cubic metres of loose limestone, 2.5 cubic metres, that's 12.5 tons. So that's been brought in there to produce an artificial level purely to create the drop hole creep, purely to create this U-bend, if you like. Yeah? Okay, next one. Okay, so this is what we've got. So here's the steps. This point here is the deepest point that I can find actually in the cave passage. When I surveyed this through here, I was using lasers and string levels. Okay, so it is quite accurate. So this level, when it's extrapolated, okay, you can see that there's been an awful lot of ground made up to achieve this particular area, just to achieve that particular unit. Now, if there's 12 tons there, let's say there's a third of it there to create that, but all that had to come in. So all that was brought in. So somebody felt the need. There was a pressing need for somebody to do this, you know. What
You
else?
say the boulder slope material brought in as well.
Oh yeah, all that. All, from there to there, it's all been brought in.
It's not a quick job. No, it's not a quick job. It's not a quick job.
Well,
More than one
by
man had
today, I'm quite good at moving rocks, and if I had 6 people, 6 fit young men, you could probably do that in less than a week.
Yeah, too late.
Because what you would do, you build this first, and then you bring your 2 half-ton boulders in. Because they're awkward, and you haven't got room to maneuver. But that's the way to do it, just travel them over a relatively level floor, put them in position, and then you can excavate underneath. Yeah? But you can prep so much. Yeah?
Are you going to have a go at telling us when they did this?
No!
Not yet, anyway.
When they did it.
They did it at 5:30 on Friday. Okay, next one. Okay, so right, there was that there, that was that. Yeah. So essentially, this is going back to pretty much the beginning, just to demonstrate that this is sat on a ledge, and when this was brought in, they had to have that dry stone coursing in place. Yeah, they had to. And they would have filled, so as this didn't move, they would have filled the gap with stonework, loose stonework. So it meant that if this thing did slip, it isn't going to travel very far. Yeah? Okay, next. Where are we now? Okay, so this is my interpretation based on the information that I can see. Okay? So that is essentially, so the non-combatants or the refugees would have been running in here, they'd have dropped down through this little hole, wriggled underneath, back up, and away. Okay? So anybody with a sharp broom handle could sit there, and a stocky naughty person who's wriggling after them, because he would have to push himself up to come up through here, his head's exposed, as is his chest. Okay.
And his arms are restricted, I take it as well.
His arms are restricted, yeah.
It's quite narrow, is it?
Yeah.
Not
yeah,
just
it's
low
very
and narrow,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. I'd have trouble getting through it, definitely. But then again, I'm fat, so. But any young kiddie with a pointy stick would upset somebody chasing after them. So, and this is the principle of this form of defensive feature. You know, an elderly person can drag themselves through there and lie in wait and give somebody a pointed argument. So do you see the principle of this feature?
Yeah.
So these are created throughout Ireland in various places, but I haven't found one in a cave yet. So it's relatively unique. It is relatively unique.
And outside of Ireland?
Well, outside of Ireland, you have, certainly in Brittany, there are things approaching this.
In caves?
No, built souterrains, specifically built souterrains. Much of Brittany isn't limestone.
I suppose if they found this and it was a cave, you wouldn't go,
You're gonna
you wouldn't
use it,
go
aren't
digging
you?
a souterrain when you have the
Absolutely.
natural one.
I mean, you know, farmers today, I mean, all of us today are pragmatic. I mean, if we can avoid work, we will do, you know? If we can reduce effort in achieving what we're after, then fine. But anyway...
Tell me, was there any sign of any on the inside of the choke or the squeeze?
Yeah.
Any sign of any really big rock that could just be rolled into place that the person can't even physically
No.
start to come out
No.
from the upside?
No.
I was wondering, would that be a handy old thing to have too?
Well, it is.
Inside.
If you look at photographs or you look at images from the underground Turkish cities like Derin, you have underground cities there that will house up to 20,000 people, and this is going back easy 1,000 years, 1,500 years. But what they had was in every one of the entrance passages, and most of the entrance passages were a little bit over 20 inches wide, and by and large they average about 1.7. Okay, you reach a point.
Meters.
Yeah, meters. Yeah. So in Turkey, to answer your point, in Turkey, one of the finest defences I've ever seen was you come down these entrance passages and you go through what appears to be a gap. And the gap is about 18 inches. And you look to one side and there is like what appears to be like a dead end. You look to the other side and there is a curved stone. And when you go inside, there are two chambers, okay? And on one chamber is where the two guys got and rolled this huge millstone into position. And in the centre of the millstone, there's a little hole. Like that. So you can actually look up the passage. Okay? So the poor bugger who's pursuing you down this passage has got nowhere to go, and he's facing an arrow coming through that point. And there are dozens of these throughout these cities. I mean, Derin isn't just one, it's one of probably 8 or 9.
It's got about 10 layers as you go down through it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it just, you mean, is it?
Yeah, it's got 10 floors.
Yeah, at the very least. And they
like
have,
Hamas, huh? Okay, like Hamas.
So they had wells there, they had stables, they brought the cattle in. So when the place was raided, they used to live up top. But when naughty people appeared on the horizon, they could bring everybody down in there. So they had air shafts, they had very clever ventilation. So, everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Everybody? Yeah? Okay, next. So, bit of comparison now then. So, what we're looking at here, okay, is that there. That stone there is that little fella underneath there. Yeah? That's the two 500 kilo stones, and that's the shaft on the opposite side. Next one, please. God, it's like doing yoga. So again, this is just another comparison to demonstrate that what you see, this edge here, is that edge there. Yeah? Okay, everybody happy with that? So it's unfortunate. I mean, I'd love to get somebody with a license and actually dig this out, because that would be a beautiful feature to actually see. But we can't touch it, you know. I'm not licensed or anything. Everybody happy with that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, next one. So, data construction. Who asked data construction? You did. How long's a piece of string?
Show us the string.
There's one.
400 out of 1,000.
There's one very accurate souterrain that's been dated in Ireland, and that was in Coolcran townland in Fermanagh. And Dr. Bale of Queen's University, Belfast, took 13 examples of the 30 oak stumps that were found in waterlogged area, which showed that the souterrain had been built in wood, in very, very poor ground. And from that, he obtained a date of 822 AD, okay, plus or minus 9 years. All right. So, what that's led people to think of is, oh, this is smack bang in the middle of when the naughty Vikings were coming over and raiding the place. Well, that's not necessarily the case. 793, Lindisfarne was raided by the Vikings. Yeah. Archaeological students here at all? So 793 was Lindisfarne. 795 was Rathlin Island, I think, wasn't it? 795 was Rathlin Island. Yeah. So that's when the Vikings came calling as hostiles. 1,000 years before that, Vikings were coming here to trade. Okay, so, you know, that was when the time they wanted to kind of move out of their restricted environment. Obviously, there was not enough land to go around with their large families and that. So, at that time, let's go back, 822. So 822 is the best accurate date we have. But as I say, it's not necessarily linked to the Vikings, because it's only 822. What's that? So it's only 27 years after the first incursion by the Vikings. Now, that's not to say that the ecclesiastical community were communicating to the monasteries and that in Ireland from Lindisfarne and so on, and Iona particularly. So 822 is as best as we can get as a date from dendrochronology. Limestone, what's limestone? 350 million years old or so? So the problem with constructions in the Burren or in any kind of rocky area is that you've got a lump of rock which was created at a particular date millions of years ago, and somebody's used that and they built a feature. So unless we are incredibly lucky where we can actually dismantle that feature, and underneath a foundation stone we find somebody who's sort of like, you know, I don't know, Eric the Red was here in 505. Unless you find something like that, or a decent remains of a bone that you can get good quality carbon-14 off of, we're kind of knackered. You know, we really are stuck. I mean, in Cahercamon, I think it was Souterrain A. In the 1930s, Henkin found a penannular brooch. It's a tiny little thing, it's about that big. And the ring is about that big. And that was found on a layer of ash. Near it was an iron hook, and next to that was a skull and a few other bits and pieces. But Henkin dated Cahercamon on the relative dating of similarities of other penannular brooches with that one that he found. Now, at the time, people kind of criticised him, but funnily enough, since then, other evidence has come to support the fact that Cahercamon is pretty much 9th century. Okay, so going all the way back round. So are you happy with that so far? Right, I'm going to add something to that. So, next one. Okay. So this is one of the slides I mentioned earlier, so we'll come back to it. And effectively what we've got here is some nicely laid stone, and we've got a mortar between it. was lime mortar. Okay, when did lime mortar come to Ireland? Came with the monks. So at the very earliest, it's 5th century. Yeah, very early AD. So from sometime between the from 400 AD to 1200 AD, that's when lime mortar was being brought in. Okay, it was brought by the monks and so on. So as best we can say, it didn't exist before the 5th century, effectively, and it's the only real honest date that you can kind of put on it. I don't think McAlpines came in at a later date when somebody said, "Look, could you do a job on the wall because it's falling down? Stick a bit of mortar in there." You know, it doesn't sort of stand up really.
And are you saying, is it the physical materials to make lime mortar that didn't exist in this area, or is it just the technology to put the lime and whatever the various other things together?
Technology.
It's the technology rather than literally importing all this stuff.
You heard, you know, lime mortar holds moisture. You know, it breathes. Yeah, it takes moisture in and it pumps moisture out. And have you heard how, on occasion, lightning is struck a click chop, you know, a round tower? Yeah. Oh yeah, the top blew off. Yeah. Well, my theory of that is that so you've had, like we've had in the past, we've had very bad rain events. So you have a particularly wet summer, say, okay, and we're creeping into sort of the end of the summer, and we're getting areas of low pressure develop, and we're now getting unstable air, and we get a thunderstorm. Okay, so you got a big pointy tower sticking up in the Midlands, say, and lightning strikes it. You know, so why doesn't it just blow the roof off? When you know the little pointy tower, why don't you just blow that off? My theory is that in that split second, you had that amount of energy boil the moisture that was in the mortar. Now, when you boil water, this is plumber talking now, when you boil water, it turns into steam by 1,200 times its own volume. Okay? So, for example, if you had 1 litre of water here and you suddenly turned it into steam, you'd have 1,200. Okay? So, and that's in that instant. So this could explain why some of these things have sort of appeared to have exploded, where later academics have said, "Oh, this is a bit of nonsense." Just
and the top's blown off.
Yeah, the steam engines. You know, it's driven ships around the world. So lime mortar. So it can't be. This couldn't have been built. That wall couldn't have been built really before the 5th century. Okay. Next. So, we're back to here now. So, information technology, how it sort of transfers around the world. So, going back to the Celts, okay, the Celts were a peaceful trading nation, developed the Amber Road and various other routes throughout Europe. You've got the Danes, the Swedes, and the Norths. They were all peace-loving people who wanted to migrate. They were under pressure with regards to the amount of land they had that could feed their growing families. So, you know, in the 2nd, 3rd century AD, they began to migrate and move to various places. Jarlshof, particularly. So we're talking about BC now. Okay, so we're still on dating. So Jarlshof is a Viking settlement, and it has souterrains. And there, I think in the very first, there were 6 phases there. In the first phase, we're looking at around about the 2nd to 1st century AD when that was built. Okay, now, so you've got your trade routes out to here. Okay, so you've got copper, tin, copper. You've got furs, amber and so on coming down there. So you've got a lot of trade going on around the area. But let's go back to the fact that this is now, let's say, 1st century AD, 1st century BC, where they're developing Jarlshof, which was quite a significant settlement with souterrains. I'm going to bring you forward now. everybody heard of Professor Reardon? John P. Reardon? Very, very clever archaeologist in the early part of the 20th century. He excavated a site at Cush near Limerick, Ring Fort 5 I think it was, and in Ring Fort 5, which he found had evolved into a Bronze Age cemetery, he found a souterrain. This souterrain was barely under the surface, so it wasn't an arrangement where you could dig underneath the soil, because it would just simply collapse. Okay. He found that there were a number of roofing lintels missing, and as he progressed, he found that part of the back of the souterrain, where several lintels remained in place, they were covered by charcoal remains from a fire, an adjacent fire, and the fire had pieces of bone in it related to the adjacent Bronze Age cremation, which was actually in an urn. So he dated that to the early Bronze Age, so we're talking like 4,000 years ago, say. Okay. Now, there was some argument about the dating of that particular souterrain, and so with Adolf Marr, who was the curator of the Dublin Museum at the time, they finally agreed to date it as late Bronze Age. So, you're looking at sort of 600 to 500 BC. Now, Richard Warner dismisses this out of hand, as do a number of people who've kind of ridden on his shirt tails with regards to their sole argument is, well, excavation techniques then aren't as good as they are now, when nothing is. But nobody explains the presence of this charcoal, this thin, burnt debris, actually over the top of the souterrain. That had to come after the back end of this souterrain. It had to. Now, there'd been no activity in that area before O'Riordan started digging it, but nobody addresses this really fine little point, and much of it is dismissed. Much of it, in many writings, it's not even alluded to. There's no reference to it. But, so let's say, for sake of argument, let's say that's 500 BC. So we've got, in Limerick, we've got one at 500 BC. We've got Jarlshof, which is somewhere in the region of 300, 200 BC. So why can't some of these be earlier? I know Clooncoose Cave holds limestone, holds lime mortar, but why are we stuck with this 400 to 1200 because it's contemporaneous with the ring fort? I mean, I still haven't found out where this kind of unofficial sort of agreement or understanding has actually come from. I have no idea.
The Romans were using lime around 500 BC.
Yeah.
The Carthaginians were using it.
Yeah.
Phoenicians were using it. So if you're talking...
But this is where you got trade. Yeah.
As a trading thing.
So, when you look at this, Marseille was Massalia. Massalia has been there for thousands of years, and that was the principal trading point in the south of France. I mean, that's where Pythias actually did his first voyage. Everybody know about Pythias? Yeah. Everybody know about Pythias? What do you do all night on television?
They didn't.
So Pythias set sail. Around here in the boat. He travelled all the way through here, and eventually he sailed off to Iceland, and he came back. I recommend the book. It is a belter. Funny enough, it's by Barry Cunliffe, but it is stunning what he got up to. But anyway, I digress. Okay, next. Questions?
What year was Pythias?
What year was Pythias? I can't remember. I can't remember. 200 BC.
Yeah, because you think like Pliny talked about him.
What was Pliny? Pliny was 49. It was early 40s, what, 80.
So
he's pre him. Yeah.
Where was Pliny again now? That's your ringing a bell.
Pompeii.
Yeah.
Pompeii. Yeah.
And there's no way to date lime water.
There probably is, yeah, but who's going to pay for it?
That's the problem. That's why very
When I
little
win the
archaeology.
lottery, Pat.
When you win the lottery,
Can you buy me a ticket?
let's run away to somewhere
Imagine.
exotic like Carrick-on.
That's-
Enjoy the
that-
sun.
Can I ask a question about that living room? What you called it, the living room or the
Oh, the alcove there, yeah.
How does something like that form underneath? Because if there was water coming in from the inside, would there still be a draft there?
Well, water wouldn't have filled the passage all the time. You get like, you know, when you get rain, you get a lot of runoff, and as the runoff runs into a hole, depending on the size of the passage in the cave, depends on whether that water flow has the capacity to fill it or not, as the case may be. Either which way, you may have an air bubble or an air pocket at the top, or not. So it's not always constant. The stuff we were diving in Gort, that's full. Those are rivers 22 metres wide and 18 metres high in places, you know.
And
And
but
they're
do they make
probably-
little alcoves like that?
Yeah, it's the method. It's the way the water gets caught and is allowed to kind of move and circulate, I suppose, really. Yeah.
It's like ordinary rivers. They can hit a hard bit of rock and then they go into
That, yeah,
crazy
I guess,
circles
yeah. Or
and
it
they
might catch
dig
it,
out.
there might be a fracture, in which case the water can eddy in amongst that and gradually begin to do it. Next!
Would you like to see it excavated?
Yes and no. Yes, it would answer a number of my questions. No, I'd leave it where it is. It's happy enough. No, it's not doing anybody any harm. The problem with archaeology is it's constructive destruction. You know, you get a lot of information out of it, but we kind of lose the thing. You know, I mean, the number of souterrains that we've lost where infrastructure's been pushed through. They're excavated and they're examined and the contents. Nobody ever accurately studies the structure of their construction, if that makes any sense. How these things are built.